On Christmas Eve, at 62 years old, my husband left me for a 29-year-old woman. Sitting alone on a frozen bench in the city park, shivering in the snow, I saw a young man without a jacket, pale from the cold, his jaw trembling. I took off my own coat and gave it to him. 3 hours later, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up in front of me. The young man stepped out of one of the vehicles and simply said, "What a relief to find you here, ma'am." But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the Elderly Stories channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are traveling. My name is Sarah. I am 62 years old, and I thought I knew every form of pain a woman could feel. I lost my mother young, raised 3 children practically alone while working double shifts as a secretary, and survived 2 serious surgeries in the last 5 years. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me to hear the words Robert said to me on the night of December 24th, 2024. It was 7 in the evening when he walked through the door of our house. I was in the kitchen finishing the Christmas dinner, the one I had been preparing for 40 years in a row. The smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie perfumed the whole house in Chicago. The table was already set with the red tablecloth I inherited from my grandmother. The white candles lit the fine china we saved for special occasions. Robert stopped in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his beige wool coat, without taking off his shoes like he always did. That should have been my first sign that something was wrong. 40 years of marriage teach you the small rituals, the routines that define a shared life. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, and his voice sounded distant, as if he were speaking from behind thick glass. I dried my hands on the embroidered apron, the one my oldest daughter gave me on Mother's Day. "Of course, honey, sit there. I'll pour you some coffee. You must be tired from the traffic." "I don't want coffee." He ran his hand through his graying hair, a gesture he made when he was nervous. "I want you to listen to what I have to say." Something in his tone made my stomach turn. I leaned against the countertop, feeling my legs go weak. At 62, my body was not the same as before. My joints ached with the cold, my blood pressure was always irregular, and I had that constant feeling of tiredness that comes with age. "I can't keep pretending anymore." Robert continued staring at the tiled floor we had laid together 10 years ago. "I haven't been happy for a long time, Sarah. A very long time." I felt as if the floor were opening up beneath my feet. "What are you talking about?" "We're fine. We've been together 40 years, Robert." 40 years. Exactly, that's why. Oh, he finally looked me in the eyes, and what I saw there split me in half. It wasn't anger, it wasn't contempt, it was indifference, pure and simple indifference. 40 years doing the same thing, having the same conversations, living the same routine. I feel trapped, Sarah. I feel old. We are old. I said, my voice coming out higher than normal. We are over 60, Robert. It's natural for things to be this way. But I don't want to feel this way. He took off his coat with sharp movements and threw it onto a chair. I met someone who makes me feel young again, who makes me want to wake up in the morning. The words left his mouth like bullets, each one hitting a vital spot. You met someone, I repeated mechanically. My brain refused to process the full meaning of those words. Her name is Jessica. She works at the restaurant where I have lunch near the office. She's 29 and... He paused, as if searching for the right words. She sees me in a way you haven't seen me in years. 29 years old, the same age as my youngest daughter. I felt bile rise in my throat. How long? I managed to ask. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of my life lived in a complete lie. I thought about all the times I kissed Robert in the last 6 months, in all the meals I cooked, in all the nights I slept beside him believing we were fine. Everything was fake. And you come to tell me this on Christmas Eve? My voice trembled. On Christmas Eve, Robert. She gave me an ultimatum, he said, and had the audacity to look uncomfortable. She said she wasn't going to spend another New Year alone waiting for me, that it was time for me to decide what I really wanted. And you decided, I concluded. It wasn't a question. I already moved my things to her apartment, most of them at least. I just came for the rest and to tell you. I looked at that man with whom I shared 4 decades of my life. The man who proposed to me under a summer rain, who was by my side when our children were born, who cried with me when we buried our parents, and I recognized nothing of him. The house, I started. It stays with you, he interrupted quickly. I don't want to fight over anything. I just want to move on. Move on. As if 40 years could be erased with those 2 simple words. The boys. I tried again, thinking of our 3 children, James, Andrew, and Paula. I'll talk to them after the holidays. He didn't want to ruin their Christmas, but it was fine to ruin mine, apparently. Robert took his coat and went toward the bedroom. I heard him opening closets, dragging suitcases. Sounds that filled the silence of the house that suddenly seemed huge and empty. I stood in the kitchen surrounded by preparations for a Christmas dinner that would never happen, feeling like a statue of salt. 15 minutes later, he passed through the kitchen carrying 2 large suitcases. Sarah, I'm very sorry, really. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was closed, my eyes burned, but the tears refused to fall. It was as if my body was in shock, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. The front door closed with a soft click, and just like that, after 40 years, my marriage ended. No screaming, no broken plates, no drama. Just a man walking out the door with his suitcases, leaving behind a 62-year-old woman and a lifetime of memories. I stood there. I don't know for how long. The oven timer beeped, startling me. The turkey was ready. I turned off the oven mechanically and stared at the set table, the food I had prepared with so much love. The Christmas decorations I had placed all over the house last week. It all seemed like a cruel farce. I took off my apron and let it fall to the floor. I grabbed my thickest winter coat from the hall closet, the brown wool one that Robert always said made me look old. I wrapped my knitted scarf around my neck and walked out into the cold night. The snow had started to fall heavily. The streets were covered by a white blanket that silenced all sounds. The houses around were lit-up windows, glowing with Christmas lights, shadows of families moving inside, happy and together. I had nowhere to go. Our children lived in other cities celebrating Christmas with their spouses' families. My few friends were all busy with their own celebrations, and I couldn't bear the idea of calling someone and having to explain what had happened, having to say out loud that my husband left me on Christmas Eve for a waitress 40 years younger. So I simply walked. The snow soaked my shoes. The cold penetrated through my thick coat, but I kept walking. I needed to move. I needed to feel something other than the hollow pain that had settled in my chest. I ended up at the city's Central Park, the one where Robert and I used to take the boys to play when they were little. There was a bench near the gazebo, partially protected by the wooden structure. I brushed the snow off the seat with my gloved hand and sat down. The cold metal pierced through my wool pants. I shivered violently. It was so cold, so unbearably cold, but I couldn't move. I couldn't go back to that empty house full of memories of a life that no longer existed. I looked at the dark sky, at the snowflakes falling incessantly. Somewhere, church bells rang, marking 8 o'clock. Midnight Mass was starting soon. Families were gathering around tables. Children were opening presents. And I was alone on a frozen bench with my life destroyed. I don't know how long I sat on that bench. The cold had already penetrated to my bones, and I could barely feel my feet inside my soaked shoes. My hands, even inside the wool gloves, were numb. But the physical pain was almost a relief. At least it made me feel something concrete, something other than the void that threatened to swallow me whole. The park was practically deserted. No one in their right mind would stay out in this cold. The few people passing by ran hurriedly to their warm homes, to their families, to their intact lives. No one looked at the older woman sitting alone on the bench. I was invisible, as I always was. For 40 years, I defined myself as Robert's wife, mother of James, Andrew, and Paula. My identity was intertwined with those people, with those roles I played. I never stopped to think about who Sarah was, the woman behind those titles. And now, sitting in that snow, I realized I had no idea. Who was I without Robert? What did I like to do, besides cooking his favorite meals and keeping the house how he preferred? When was the last time I chose to watch a movie I wanted instead of giving in to the war documentaries he loved? When was the last time I did something just because it gave me pleasure I couldn't remember? I was so lost in those thoughts that I almost didn't notice the figure approaching. It was only when I heard irregular footsteps in the snow that I raised my head. A young man was walking along the main path of the park, his steps slow and cautious. As he got closer, I could see his features better in the dim light of the street lamps. He must have been about 25, maybe 30. Tall, thin, with dark hair and unshaven beard. He wore old jeans and a long-sleeved shirt far too thin for this weather. No jacket, no gloves, no scarf. He was shivering violently. My maternal instinct, the one that 40 years of caring for others had sharpened into a second nature, activated immediately. I forgot my own pain, my own situation. All I saw was a young man freezing in the snow. "Young man," I called out, my voice coming out hoarse from the cold. "Young man, are you okay?" He stopped and looked in my direction, seeming surprised to see someone there. His eyes were dark and tense, even in the gloom. "I'm looking for a place to warm up," he said. "The shelters are full. They always fill up on Christmas. Everyone wants to feel good helping the poor folks during the holidays, you know." There was bitterness in his voice, but also resignation, as if he were used to disappointment. I got up from the bench, with difficulty, my joints protesting after being still for so long in the cold. "You're going to freeze in those clothes. Where is your jacket?" He shrugged a gesture that made him shiver even more. "I don't have one. I lost my job 3 months ago, lost my apartment shortly after. The things I had were stolen at the shelter. Now I only have what I'm wearing." I looked at him more closely. Despite the beard and worn clothes, there was something about him that didn't fit the image of a homeless person. His way of speaking was articulate, educated. His hands, though dirty, didn't look like someone who had spent years on the streets. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was freezing, and I had a heavy coat that could save him. Without thinking much, I started taking off my brown wool coat. "Here," I said, holding it out to him. "Put this on." He looked at me as if I had gone crazy. "Ma'am, you're going to freeze. I can't accept it. I have more clothes underneath." I lied. I was wearing only a thin wool blouse under the coat. "And I'm not going to stay out here much longer. You, on the other hand, are going to spend the night looking for shelter." "You need it more than I do." That was true. Despite everything, I still had a house to go back to. This boy had nothing. "Please," I insisted when he hesitated, "let me do this." "No, it's Christmas. Let me do something good today." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He took the coat with trembling hands and put it on quickly. It was too big for him, but it would do. I saw the instant relief on his face when the warmth of the wool enveloped him. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't even know me. Why would you do this?" "Because someone needs help," I answered simply. "And because today I learned that the worst things can happen without warning. If I can prevent something bad from happening to you, I'm going to do it." The cold hit me with full force as soon as the coat left my shoulders. The wind cut through my thin blouse like knives of ice. I started shivering immediately, but I didn't regret it. This young man needed it more than I did. He studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes evaluating me. "My name is Matthew," he said finally, "and you just saved my life. Literally "Sarah," I replied, "and you're exaggerating. It's just a coat." "It's not just a coat." He put his hands in the pockets, clearly appreciating the warmth. "It's the first act of genuine kindness I've received since I lost everything. Most people look at me as if I were invisible, or worse, as if I were dangerous." I knew that feeling of invisibility well. At 62, I had become invisible to my own husband. "What brought you here?" I asked, hugging my own body in a vain attempt to warm myself. "To this park, I mean." "I used to come here when I was a kid," Matthew said, looking around. "My parents brought me to play. Good times." His voice became distant. "They died 5 years ago. Car accident. After that, things fell apart. I fell apart." "I'm so sorry," I said sincerely. "And you?" he asked. "What brings you to a frozen bench on Christmas Eve?" I hesitated. I didn't know this boy. I didn't know him anything, but maybe that was exactly why the words came out. "My husband left me today. 40 years of marriage, thrown in the trash because he met a 29-year-old waitress who makes him feel young again." My voice cracked on the last word. "He left the house 2 hours ago, and I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay surrounded by everything we built together." Matthew nodded slowly, as if he understood perfectly. "Funny how life works, isn't it? You have a house, but you can't stay in it." "I would give anything for a house, but I don't have one. We both ended up on this frozen bench running from different things." He was right. It was ironically poetic. "Can I tell you something, Sarah?" He continued. "A man who abandons 40 years of marriage for someone younger is an idiot. He may think he's looking for youth, but what he's really doing is running from himself. And you don't run from yourself by changing partners. You just take your problems to a new address." The words were surprisingly mature for someone so young. "You're wise for your age," I observed. "Living on the streets teaches you a lot about human nature," he said with a sad smile, "seeing people at their worst and occasionally at their best, like you today." The cold was becoming unbearable now. My teeth chattered uncontrollably and I could barely feel my fingers. Matthew noticed. "You need to go home," he said firmly. "You've been here too long. You're going to get sick." "And you?" I asked. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to look for a place." He touched the coat reverently. "Thanks to this, I have a better chance now. There's a diner a few blocks from here that stays open all night. I can stay there until dawn." I took off my scarf, the only warm thing I still had, and held it out to him. "Take this too. Please, Sarah, I insist." He took the scarf, his eyes shining with unshed emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." I tried to smile, although my face was too numb to know if I succeeded. "Just take care of yourself, okay? And when things get better, and they will remember this moment, remember to pay it forward." Matthew nodded, wrapping the scarf around his neck. "I'm always going to remember you, Sarah. The woman who gave her coat to a stranger on the coldest night of the year, even when she was going through the worst night of her life." He took a few steps to walk away. Then he stopped and turned back. "Sarah, that man is an idiot. I hope you realize that. You are extraordinary." Before I could answer, he nodded at me and walked away into the snow, his figure becoming smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely into the darkness. I was left alone again now, without a coat, without a scarf, shivering violently in the cold. But for the first time on that terrible night, I felt something other than pain. I felt purpose. For a few minutes, I had made a difference in someone's life. I had mattered. The walk back home was torture. Without the coat, the cold penetrated through my thin blouse in seconds. Every step was a struggle against the cutting wind that seemed determined to knock me down. My soaked shoes slipped on the snow, making every movement dangerous. At 62, a fall could mean broken bones, months of recovery. But I kept going, putting one foot in front of the other, focusing only on the next step. I didn't think about Robert, didn't think about the empty apartment waiting for me, didn't think about how my life had crumbled in a matter of hours. I thought only about getting home, about warmth, about surviving that night. When I finally opened the front door, the temperature difference was so shocking, I almost fell. The house was warm. The Christmas lights still blinked cheerfully in the living room, and the smell of turkey still floated in the air. It looked like a house where happy people lived. It was a cruel lie. I went straight to the bathroom, peeling off my wet clothes with numb fingers that barely obeyed my commands. I got into the shower and let the hot water thaw my body slowly. The pain when feeling returned to my fingers and feet was intense, but welcome. It meant I hadn't suffered serious frostbite. I stayed in the shower until the water started to get cold. Then I wrapped myself in the softest robe I had and went to the kitchen. Dinner was still there, untouched. The turkey on the platter, the casseroles in their festive bowls, the wilted salad I had prepared hours ago, when I still thought I would have a normal Christmas. I looked at that food for a long moment. It represented hours of work, decades of tradition, and all for nothing. Robert was somewhere with his 29-year-old Jessica, probably eating something fancy in an expensive restaurant, proving to himself that he was still young and desirable. I took a spoon and ate some casserole straight from the bowl standing in the empty kitchen. It tasted like nothing. It could have been sawdust, and I wouldn't have noticed the difference. I ended up throwing everything away. Every platter, every carefully prepared dish, everything went into the trash. Then I cleared the table, put away my grandmother's tablecloth, blew out the candles. I took down all the Christmas decorations in the living room and threw them back into the boxes without any care. I wanted to erase every trace of that Christmas that never happened. It was almost midnight when I finally dragged myself to bed, the bed I shared with Robert for 40 years. His side still had the indentation from where he had slept the night before. His pillow still had his scent. I hugged that pillow and finally let the tears fall. I cried for everything I had lost, not just Robert, but the life we built, the future we planned, the person I thought I was. I cried for the 62-year-old woman I was discarded like an old piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. I cried for the loneliness that stretched out before me, endless and terrifying. And at some point in the middle of that crying, I fell asleep exhausted. The following days passed in a haze. On Christmas Day, I ignored my children's calls. I couldn't pretend everything was fine, but I wasn't ready to tell the truth either. So I just didn't answer sending texts saying I had a bad flu and didn't want to pass it to my grandkids. I spent the whole day in pajamas watching TV shows without really seeing anything. The house felt strange without Robert, too quiet, too empty. Every room held memories that now seemed tainted by betrayal. On the 26th, I forced myself to eat something other than toast. I made scrambled eggs that I could barely swallow. I took a shower, changed out of my pajamas, small victories that seemed monumental. On the 27th, I finally answered when my daughter Paula called for the 10th time. "Mom, I was worried. How are you? Still got the flu?" I opened my mouth to lie, to say yes, that I was feeling better. "Thanks for asking," but the words that came out were different. "Your father left me Paula." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, what? And then it all came out. I told her about Christmas Eve, about Jessica, about the 40 years thrown in the trash. Paula stayed silent most of the time, only making small sounds of confirmation to show she was listening. When I finished, she was crying. "Mom, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I'm going to catch the first flight there. You shouldn't be alone." "No," I said firmly. "You have your family, your kids. I don't want to ruin your new year, too. But Mom, I'm fine, Paula, or I'm going to be. I just need time." We talked a little more. She made me promise I would call every day, that I would eat well, that I wouldn't just stay lying in bed. I promised, even knowing I would probably break those promises. Then I called my sons too. James was furious, wanting to come immediately to confront his father. Andrew stayed silent, processing. Both offered to come visit me. Both received the same answer, "Stay with your families. I'll be fine." But the truth was, I didn't know if I was going to be fine. I had no idea how to move on from there. It was December 28th, 3 days after that terrible night that my life changed again. I was in the living room trying to find energy to shower when I heard a strange sound outside. It sounded like car engines, many car engines all arriving at the same time. I went to the window and peeked through the curtains. My quiet suburban street was being taken over by a fleet of luxury cars, black SUVs, all identical, all very expensive. There were at least 8, maybe 10 vehicles lining up perfectly along the curb. My first thought was that it must be some mistake. Maybe they were looking for someone else's house. My second thought was worry. Had something happened to one of my children? Were they police coming to deliver bad news? Then the doors began to open. Men in black suits stepped out of each vehicle, moving with military precision. But they weren't aggressive. They stood along the street like an honor guard. And then, from one of the middle cars, Matthew stepped out. But it wasn't the Matthew I had met. That Matthew was wearing dirty jeans and a thin shirt, shivering from cold. This Matthew wore an impeccable suit that probably cost more than my car. His hair was styled, his beard trimmed to perfection. He looked like he had stepped out of a business magazine. He walked straight to my door and rang the doorbell. I stood paralyzed. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Was it really Matthew, the homeless young man to whom I had given my coat 3 nights ago? What was happening? The doorbell rang again. With trembling hands, I went to the door and opened it a crack. "Sarah," said Matthew, and his smile was warm, genuine. "What a relief to find you here. Matthew." My voice came out weak and credulous. I don't understand. What is all this?" I pointed to the cars, to the men in suits. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. "I have a lot to explain." I opened the door wider, suddenly painfully aware that I was still in pajamas, without makeup, with uncombed hair. But Matthew didn't seem to notice or care. He entered looking around my living room with genuine interest. "So," I started closing the door behind him, "are you going to explain to me what's going on? Why are there 10 SUVs on my street? Who are those people?" Matthew took a deep breath. "My full name is Matthew Randall. I am the CEO of Randall Developments." The name was familiar. Randall Developments was one of the largest construction and real estate companies in the country. They appeared in the news, frequently involved in huge urban projects in New York and Chicago. I must have stood staring at him with my mouth open because Matthew smiled gently and said, "Maybe you should sit down." I let myself fall onto the sofa, still trying to process. Matthew Randall, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. That same man was shivering from cold in the park 3 nights ago, wearing worn clothes, having nowhere to sleep. "I don't understand," I managed to say finally. "You said you were homeless, that you had lost everything." "I lied," he said simply, sitting in the armchair opposite me. "Well, not exactly. The part about my parents dying was true, and things really fell apart after that, just not in the way I suggested." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "When my parents died, I inherited their company. I was 23 and experienced, but I tried to make it work. For 2 years, I dedicated myself completely. I built Randall Developments into something 3 times bigger than my father ever imagined. But in the process, I surrounded myself with the wrong people. People who saw only my money, my position. I had friends who disappeared when I could no longer fund their expensive lifestyles. I had relationships with women who were more interested in my bank account than in me." His voice became lower, sadder. 6 months ago, I discovered my fiancé was having an affair with my best friend, or the man I thought was my best friend. They planned to get married after getting me to sign some documents that would transfer a large part of my assets to her. I felt my heart tighten. Betrayal was a pain I knew too well. I canceled everything, obviously, broke the engagement, cut ties with him. but that left me in a sort of existential crisis. I started questioning everything and everyone around me. Did anyone really care? Or was it all about the money? He got up and started pacing the room. So I decided to run a test. I decided to disguise myself as someone who had nothing and see how people would treat me. I spent the last 3 months doing this periodically, dressing in old clothes, walking through different parts of the city, observing how people react to someone they think has nothing to offer. And what did you discover? I asked, already imagining the answer. That most people don't see you if you can't do anything for them. I passed hundreds of people, and the vast majority ignored me completely. Some were actively cruel. Some threw coins as if I were a beggar without even looking at my face. He stopped and looked directly at me. But you were different, Sarah. You were clearly going through the worst moment of your life. Anyone would have understood if you had simply walked on, focused on your own pain. But you saw someone in need and immediately acted to help. It was just a coat and a scarf, I murmured. It wasn't just nothing, Matthew said firmly. You literally took the clothes off your back to give them to a stranger, without asking questions, without judging, without expecting anything in return. You were freezing, but you worried more about my well-being than your own. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out my brown coat, clean-pressed and looking new. I had it restored, he said, holding it out to me. But Sarah, I didn't come here just to return your coat. I came to make you a proposal. I took the coat, feeling the familiar fabric between my fingers. I was confused, emotional, and completely lost about where this conversation was going. What kind of proposal? Matthew sat back down, his posture becoming more formal, more professional. Randall Developments has a philanthropic arm, the Randall Institute. We donate about $4 million a year to various causes, building affordable housing, educational programs, community centers. Currently, the Institute is managed by people with degrees in business and finance. They are competent but disconnected. They look at spreadsheets and reports but have never really seen the reality of the people we are trying to help. He looked at me with intensity. I need someone who understands what it's really like to need help. Someone who has genuine compassion. Someone who sees people, not numbers. And in the last 3 months of doing this experiment, you are the first person who demonstrated the kind of character I'm looking for. My heart was racing. What exactly are you proposing? I want you to work as Director of Community Relations for the Randall Institute. It would be your responsibility to ensure our programs truly meet the needs of the communities. You would visit projects, talk to beneficiaries, help us understand where we can make a real difference. He quoted a salary that made me blink in disbelief. It was more than Robert and I earned together in our best years. Matthew, I don't have experience in that area. I was a secretary all my life. How can I manage multi-million-dollar programs? You would learn and you wouldn't be alone. We have a whole team of professionals who handle the technical aspects. What we need is someone with heart, with real empathy. That isn't taught in any university. I looked at my hands, the wrinkles marking every year of my 62 years. Why me, Matthew? You must have found other good people during your tests. I found people who threw coins, people who said good luck and walked on. One woman bought me a sandwich. They were kind gestures, yes, but nothing that really cost them anything. He leaned forward again. You gave me something that cost you. You were freezing, but you cared more about me. That isn't just kindness, Sarah. That is sacrifice, and it is exactly the kind of person I want leading our philanthropic efforts. I don't know. I hesitated. It's a lot of responsibility. What if I fail? Then we adjust course and try again. But Sarah, can I tell you something? That night you told me your husband left you for someone younger, that he made you feel discarded, worthless. I nodded, feeling the familiar pain squeeze my chest. That man was a blind idiot, Matthew said with conviction, because looking at you now, I see someone with decades of wisdom, of compassion, of strength. I see someone who chooses to help even when she is suffering. That is extraordinary, Sarah. You are extraordinary. Tears began to run down my face. It had been so long since anyone saw me that way. It had been so long that I hadn't seen myself that way. You don't have to decide now, Matthew continued gently. Think about it. But Sarah, even if you say no, I want you to know that that night changed something in me. You showed me that genuine goodness still exists in the world, that there are still people who do the right thing simply because it is the right thing. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand. Can I ask one thing? Anything. Why did you keep doing that test? You had already discovered that most people are selfish. What were you still looking for? Matthew stayed silent for a moment, looking out the window. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. I was looking for a reason to believe it was worth continuing, that it was worth building, donating, trying to make a difference. After my fiancé's betrayal, I was starting to think people were fundamentally selfish, that everything was transactional. He looked at me again. But you proved I was wrong. And that is worth more to me than you can imagine. We sat in silence for a moment. Two wounded people who met at the worst moment of their lives and somehow helped each other start to heal. How much time do I have to think? I asked finally. As much time as you need. But Matthew took a business card from his pocket and put it on the coffee table. I sincerely hope you say yes. I believe we could do amazing work together. He got up to leave. I did the same, walking him to the door. At the door, he stopped and turned. That coat saved me that night, not physically. I have drivers and security guards who would have looked for me if I called, but you saved me in a different way. You saved me from losing faith in people. Thank you for that, Sarah. And please think about my proposal. The world needs more people like you in positions where they can make a difference. After he left and the SUVs disappeared down the street, I stood in the doorway for a long time, holding the business card and my restored coat. My life had been destroyed just 3 days ago. I felt old, discarded, without purpose. And now suddenly someone was telling me I was extraordinary, that I had value, that I could make a difference in the world. It was terrifying. It was exciting. It was completely unexpected. I spent the next 3 days on an emotional roller coaster. 1 hour I was convinced I should accept Matthew's proposal. The next hour I was sure it would be a complete disaster. At 62, without experience, what did I know about managing multi-million-dollar philanthropic programs? But then I thought about how I felt that night in the park, how for a few minutes I had completely forgotten my own pain to help someone, how that gave me a purpose even if it was temporary. And I thought about Matthew, a man who had everything but felt empty, desperately looking for something real in a world of fakeness. We were both broken in different ways, but that chance meeting had given us something we needed: hope. On the third day, I was looking out the kitchen window, watching the snow that had finally stopped falling when my phone rang. It was Robert. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. Sarah. His voice sounded tired. Can we talk? About what, Robert? I think you said everything on Christmas Eve. Please, just please. I sighed. Okay, but not here. I don't want you in my house. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral and public. When I arrived there an hour later, he was already waiting with 2 cups of coffee on the table. Robert looked awful. He had deep dark circles he hadn't shaved, and his clothes were wrinkled. He wasn't the confident man who had left the house 4 days ago. Thanks for coming, he said when I sat down. I wasn't sure if you would. I almost didn't, I answered honestly. What do you want, Robert? He stirred his coffee, avoiding my gaze. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Something in me hardened. Really? When exactly did you realize that when Jessica started asking for things that were too expensive, when you realized a 29-year-old girl has nothing in common with a 65-year-old man? It wasn't like that, he muttered. Then how was it? I finally looked at him and saw shame in his eyes. She broke up with me 2 days after Christmas. She said I was old and boring for her, that she thought I would be more fun, but I just complained about my back and wanted to go to bed early. I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was a deep sadness. And now you want to come back? I concluded. Now that your fantasy of youth blew up in your face, you want to come back to the reliable and predictable wife. It's not like that. It is exactly like that, Robert. My voice was calm but firm. You discarded me like an old garment that didn't fit anymore, and now that you found out the new clothes weren't as comfortable as you thought, you want to go back to the old one. Sarah, 40 years, can't be thrown in the trash like that. You threw them, I said dryly. You made that decision, on Christmas Eve no less. You destroyed our life together because you wanted to feel young. I picked up my coffee and took a sip, noting that Robert had remembered how I like it, with milk and a little sugar. 40 years of habit. Do you know what I realized in these last few days? I continued. I realized you were right about one thing. I was trapped in a routine, in a life that didn't challenge me anymore. But not because I was old or boring, because I had stopped growing. I became just your wife, just the mother of our children. I forgot to be Sarah. Exactly. Robert perked up as if I were agreeing with him. But we can change that. We can... No, I interrupted. You didn't understand. I don't want to go back to what we were. I don't want that life anymore. His expression changed to confusion. What do you mean? I thought about Matthew's card in my purse, about the proposal that seemed simultaneously impossible and perfect, about the chance to be something more than just someone's discarded wife. I received a job offer, I said. An important position with a lot of responsibility, something I never imagined doing. Robert frowned. What kind of job? That doesn't matter. What matters is that someone saw value in me. Someone believes I can make a difference in the world, not as your wife or as the mother of our children, as Sarah, as myself. Sarah, be realistic. You're 62. Who would give an important position to an old woman? I completed. Is that what you were going to say? He had the decency to look ashamed. Do you know what the difference is between you and the person who offered me that job, Robert? She sees me. She sees who I really am, not how old I am. She values my compassion, my life experience, my character. I stood up, taking my purse. I should thank you, actually. If you hadn't left me, I never would have met that person. I never would have had this opportunity. I never would have realized there is still so much I can do. So much I can be. Sarah, wait. No, I said firmly. You made your decision on Christmas Eve. Now I am making mine. I don't want you back, Robert. I don't want that life back. I want something new, something mine. And for the first time in decades, I'm going to pursue what I want, not what others expect of me. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. My hands were shaking. My heart was beating fast, but I felt powerful. For the first time since Robert had left, I felt in control of my own life. I got into the car and took Matthew's card. I dialed the number before I could change my mind. He answered on the second ring. Sarah. Yes, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My answer is yes. I accept the position. I could hear the smile in his voice. I am so happy. When can you start? Tomorrow. I surprised myself by saying, no point in waiting, right? Tomorrow is perfect. I'll have my assistant send you all the details. Sarah. Yes. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, for believing we can do something special together. Thank you, I replied, for reminding me that I still have value, that I can still surprise. After hanging up, I sat in the car for a long moment, letting the reality of what I had just done hit me. I had a new job, an important, challenging, terrifying job. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt alive. My first day at Randall Developments was a mix of absolute terror and pure excitement. The company headquarters occupied 15 floors of a glass building in the financial district. The Randall Institute was on the top 3 floors with stunning views of the city. Matthew's assistant, an efficient woman named Patricia, met me in the lobby. "Ms. Sarah, welcome. Mr. Matthew is in a meeting, but he asked me to show you everything." I spent the first few hours getting a full tour. I met the Institute team, 10 dedicated people who managed everything from project approval to monitoring results. Everyone was polite, but I could sense the skepticism in their eyes. Who was this 62-year-old woman with no relevant experience who was suddenly being placed in a leadership position? Matthew appeared at lunchtime and suggested we eat in his office while he explained his vision for the Institute. "The problem with traditional philanthropy," he said as we ate salads his assistant had ordered, "is that it's very distant. People in nice offices deciding what communities need without ever really talking to those communities. I want to change that. I want you to go into the field, visit the projects we fund, talk to the people we are supposedly helping, understand what is working and what isn't." "And if I discover that a lot of things aren't working?" I asked. "Then we fix it. That's the point, Sarah. I'm not looking for someone to maintain the status quo. I'm looking for someone to challenge, question, and improve everything we do." We spent the next afternoon reviewing the Institute's current projects. There were so many: schools in needy communities, job training programs, community centers, housing projects. Each one represented millions of dollars invested lives, potentially transformed. But as I read the reports, I noticed something. They were all very sterile, full of numbers and statistics, but without real stories of real people, without faces, without names, without the humanity behind the data. "Matthew," I said, pointing to a particularly dry report on a training program, "here it says we trained 500 individuals in basic professional skills. But who are these individuals? Did they get jobs afterwards? Did their lives really improve?" He looked at the report and then at me, a slow smile forming on his face. "That is exactly the right question to ask, and honestly, I don't know. We never visited the place." "Then let's visit it," I said with a confidence I didn't know I had. "Tomorrow let's see that program with our own eyes." And that was what we did. The next day, Matthew and I, accompanied only by his driver, went to visit the San Juan Job Training Center, located in one of the humblest areas of the city. What we found was revealing. The center itself was well-intentioned, a clean and organized facility with classrooms and equipment. But talking to the instructors and students, we discovered problems no report had mentioned. "The courses are good," said Maria, a 35-year-old woman who was taking a sewing course. "But most of us can't get jobs afterwards. Companies want experience, and we have no way to get experience without a first job. It's a vicious cycle." Another problem: the center closed at 5 p.m. exactly when many people who needed the courses were getting off their low-paying jobs. "I would love to take the computer course," explained a young man named Raphael, "but I work 2 jobs to support my family. When could I come?" Matthew and I spent 3 hours there just talking to people, listening to their stories, understanding their realities. And when we left, we had a huge list of things that needed to change. On the way back, Matthew was thoughtful. "We invested $2 million in that center, and it is helping some people, yes. But it could be helping so much more if we had really understood the community's needs. So let's change that," I said. "Let's expand the operating hours. Let's create partnerships with companies to ensure graduates have real job opportunities. Let's make it meaningful." He looked at me with admiration. "You've been here 3 days and you're already revolutionizing how we do things." "I'm just asking questions," I replied, and listening to the answers. The following weeks were a whirlwind. We visited project after project, each revealing gaps between intention and real impact. And in every place, we made changes. In the housing program, we discovered houses were built without considering families' real needs. Many had only one bedroom, inadequate for larger families. We changed the design. In the community health program, we realized clinics operated at hours that didn't serve workers. We extended hours and added weekend service. In a school meal program, we discovered many children arrived hungry because they didn't have breakfast at home. We added a morning meal. Each change seemed small in isolation, but together they were transforming how the Randall Institute operated. And I was thriving in a way I never imagined possible. For the first time in decades, I woke up excited to go to work. My days were full of purpose, of challenges, of the feeling of making a real difference in the world. Robert tried to call me several times in the first few weeks. I ignored most of the calls. When I finally answered, I told him clearly there was nothing to discuss. He had made his decision. I had made mine. Our story was finished. He tried to argue, say he still loved me, that we could start over, but his words sounded empty. How can you love someone you discarded so easily? How can you trust someone who destroyed 40 years in one night? Robert, I said finally, you set me free. Don't you realize if you hadn't left me, I never would have discovered what I'm capable of. I never would have found this purpose. So thank you sincerely. But no, we are not getting back together. Ever. My children were having mixed reactions to my new life. Paula was proud, encouraging. James was worried I was making too big changes too fast. Andrew was confused by it all. Mom, Paula told me during a video call, you look young, happy. I haven't seen you like this in years. She was right. When I looked in the mirror now, I saw someone different. I was still 62. I still had wrinkles and gray hair. But my eyes shone. My posture was straighter. There was an energy in me that didn't exist before. 3 months after starting at the Randall Institute, Matthew called me to his office for a meeting. When I entered, I found not only him, but also 3 members of the board of Randall Developments. My stomach tightened. Had I done something wrong? Had my radical changes upset someone important? Sarah. Matthew began a mysterious smile on his face. I would like to formally introduce you to some members of our board. They asked to meet you. An elegant woman of about 50 stood up and extended her hand. Dr. Beatrice, board member and specialist in social development. I have followed your work at the Institute with much interest. Good or bad interest? I couldn't help asking. She laughed. Very good. What you have done in 3 months is remarkable. The effectiveness rate of our programs increased by 40%. The feedback from communities is the best we've ever had. And most importantly, we are really changing lives in a measurable way. The other board members agreed, citing statistics and results that honestly surprised me. I knew I was doing a good job, but I hadn't realized the full impact. The board is so impressed, Matthew continued, that we would like to propose something. We want to significantly expand the Randall Institute, double our annual budget to $8 million, and we want you to lead that expansion as executive director. Executive director. Of the entire institute, not just community relations, but everything. But Matthew, I started. It will still be my project, he said, but you have demonstrated a vision and an execution capacity that far exceed what I could do alone. Sarah, you have transformed not only the institute, but the way the whole company thinks about social responsibility. I looked at those successful, powerful people offering me a huge responsibility. 6 months ago, I was just Robert's discarded wife. Now they were offering me the leadership of one of the country's largest philanthropic institutes. I need a moment, I said, getting up. Excuse me. I went to the bathroom and leaned against the sink, looking at my reflection. Shaking hands, racing heart. Was it fear? Was it excitement? Both I thought about the Sarah of 6 months ago sitting on that frozen bench, feeling like her life was over. If I could talk to her now, what would I say? I would tell her that the end of something can be the beginning of something even better. That 62 isn't the end, it's just another chapter. That you are capable of much more than you ever imagined. I went back to the meeting room and found everyone waiting anxiously. Yes, I said simply. I accept. The room erupted in smiles and handshakes. Matthew hugged me quickly, whispering, I knew you would say yes. You are too brave to refuse a challenge. The following weeks were intense. I formally took over as executive director, which meant not only managing existing programs, but developing new ones. We hired more staff, including young people from communities we had helped, people who understood from their own experience what communities needed. We created a revolutionary pilot program. Instead of simply funding projects, we would create a microcredit fund for small entrepreneurs in needy communities, with guidance and support, not just charity. It's about dignity, I explained in a presentation to the board. We don't want people to depend on our donations forever. We want to give them the tools to build their own lives. The program was a resounding success. In the first year, we funded 200 small businesses. The success rate was 85%, well above the national average, and every story was inspiring. The seamstress who opened her own shop, the baker who managed to buy professional equipment, the teacher who created a tutoring school. Every success fed me. It gave me energy to do more. It was during the launch of our 5th community center unit that something unexpected happened. I was giving a speech to the gathered community talking about the power of second chances when I noticed a familiar figure at the back of the crowd, Robert. My heart jumped, but I kept talking. I wasn't going to let his presence destabilize me, not anymore. After the event, while I was talking to community members, he approached. He seemed smaller somehow, older, more tired. Sarah, he said when we were finally alone, you were amazing up there. Thank you, I replied formally. What are you doing here, Robert? I needed to see it for myself. I heard about your work. I read about you in the papers. I couldn't believe you were the same Sarah I knew. I'm not, I said simply. That Sarah died on Christmas Eve. This is someone new. He looked at the ground. I was an idiot, the biggest idiot in the world. I threw away the best thing I ever had for an empty fantasy. Yes, you were. I agreed, without emotion. But you know what I thank you now? If you hadn't left me, I never would have found this. I pointed to the center around us. People smiling, children playing in the new park. I never would have discovered I had this inside me. Sarah isn't there any chance. No, I interrupted firmly. There isn't. You made your decision, Robert, and thanks to that decision, I made mine. I am happy now, maybe happier than I ever was, and I'm not going to give this up for someone who discarded me so easily. I saw pain in his eyes, and a part of me felt pity, but it was a small, distant part. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said gently, but it won't be with me. That door is closed, Robert, permanently. He nodded slowly, finally understanding there was no way back. You deserve all the happiness, Sarah. I'm sorry I took so long to realize how special you are. Me too, I replied. But at least I realized eventually. That's what matters. Matthew appeared at my side as soon as Robert left. Everything okay? He asked softly. More than okay, I replied with a smile. That was my past. This here. I pointed to everything around us. Is my present and my future. 1 year after that fateful Christmas Eve, I was standing at another event, this one very different. It was the official launch of the Randall Microcredit Initiative, now a national program that had helped more than 1,000 small entrepreneurs realize their dreams. The event was being held in the main hall of Randall Developments, with hundreds of guests from important business people to beneficiaries of our programs from communities we transformed. I was on stage about to give the opening speech when I looked at the audience and saw faces representing my journey. My 3 children were in the front row, all smiling proudly. Maria, the seamstress I met at the first center I visited, now owner of her own small factory, was there. Raphael, the young man who wanted to take a computer course but didn't have time, was now a junior programmer at a startup. Dozens of other people whose lives had been touched by our work. And Matthew was beside me on stage, not as my boss, but as my partner in this mission. I began to speak, and the words flowed naturally. I spoke about second chances, about how endings can be beginnings in disguise, about never being too late to discover your purpose. Exactly 1 year ago, I said, I was sitting on a frozen bench, convinced my life was over. I was 62, had just been left by the man I spent 40 years with, and saw no future before me. But that night, I made a simple choice. I saw someone in need and decided to help even when I myself was suffering. And that simple choice changed everything. I looked at Matthew, who was smiling encouragingly. I learned that kindness is not weakness, that compassion is strength, that we are never too old to start over, to grow, to become something new. And I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are just the universe pushing us in the direction we should have been going all along. The audience applauded, but I continued. This institute, this work we do, is not about charity. It is about dignity. It is about seeing potential where others see problems. It is about giving people not what we think they need, but the tools for them to build what they know they need. Because I have been there. I was in the place where you feel discarded, worthless, forgotten. And I know that all we need sometimes is for someone to see our value when we ourselves cannot see it. When I finished, there was a standing ovation. Tears ran down my face, but they were tears of joy, of fulfillment, of gratitude. After the event, during the reception, a young woman approached. She was about 30, elegantly dressed, and there was something familiar about her face. "Ms. Sarah," she began nervously. "My name is Jessica." My whole body tensed. Jessica, the 29-year-old waitress Robert had chosen over me. "I know who you are," I said calmly. "I needed to come. I needed to apologize." She looked at the ground. What I did was terrible. I knew he was married, but I convinced myself that didn't matter, that love justified everything. She took a deep breath. But it doesn't justify it. And after I broke up with him, I realized how much I had hurt not only him, but you, a woman who never did anything bad to me. I looked at her, that woman who had been part of the worst night of my life, and I realized I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I felt nothing. She was irrelevant to who I had become. "You are forgiven," I said simply. Jessica blinked in surprise. Just like that, without more. Just like that. Because holding on to anger would only hurt me. And because honestly, you did me a favor. If Robert hadn't left me, I never would have found this. I pointed to the room full of people, the work we had built. "So thank you, actually." She seemed confused, but also relieved. "You are a better person than I could ever be." "No," I corrected gently. "I just had to learn some hard lessons about self-worth and purpose. You are still young. You still have time to learn yours." After she left, Matthew approached. That was Jessica. He asked. It was, "And are you okay?" I smiled. "I am more than okay. I am grateful. Without her, without Robert leaving me, I never would have met you. I never would have discovered this version of me." Matthew stayed silent for a moment. "Sarah, there is something I have wanted to ask you for months." "What?" "Would you have dinner with me? Not as colleagues, not as work partners, as something more." My heart raced. Over the months, I had felt a connection growing between us. It wasn't just professional. It was personal, deep, real. "Matthew, you are 32. I am 63. People will talk." "Let them talk," he said with intensity. "Sarah, you saved me that night in the park, not physically, but spiritually. You showed me that genuine goodness still exists in the world. And in the months since then, watching you work, seeing your heart, your passion, your wisdom, I fell in love. Not with your age, not despite your age, with you, with who you are." Tears filled my eyes again. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I would have dinner with you." He smiled that warm smile I had learned to adore. "How about we start tomorrow night?" Tomorrow night would be perfect. While the event continued around us, we stood there for a moment, two broken people who met on the worst night of their lives and helped each other heal, become something new. 2 years later, I would be standing in a beautifully decorated garden, wearing a simple white dress about to marry Matthew. My children would be there, still processing, but eventually supporting. Hundreds of people whose lives we touched would be there, and in the place of honor would be a framed photo of my old brown coat, the catalyst for everything. But that night, while Matthew and I looked at each other in the middle of celebrating everything we had built together, I knew only one thing for certain. Sometimes you need to lose everything to discover what really matters. You need to be broken to be remade stronger. You need to hit bottom to learn to fly. I was 62 when my life ended, and 62 when it really began. The Christmas Eve that destroyed my marriage was the same night that gave me my purpose. The coat I gave to a stranger returned to me a future I never dared to dream, and I learned that never ever is it too late to become who you were born to be. Now, if you like this story, click subscribe, and tell me in the comments what part left you with your mouth open. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't upload here. I'll wait for you there.